Here's the patent trademark for the FidoNet logo. How many people here know what I say when I say FidoNet? All right, good enough. FidoNet was an amateur network of computer bulletin boards that enabled them to pass messages among each other, because computer bulletin boards could not sustain more than a single caller, maybe two with some trickery. So people would basically set up their computers so that at night they would all trade the messages. So you could have a much larger, interesting network. It was subsumed by insanity and politics within minutes. But it would go on for many years and still exists today because it's an extremely cheap way to send mail from developing countries, bizarre situations where the internet is censored or kept down. You can use phone lines, and because they do polling so quickly, they don't often even register as phone calls. It's a very effective technology. It's been worked on for many, many, many years. Now, to understand a little bit of what I'm about to say, I have to say that they came up with a system where you didn't want every computer to call every other computer that night. So instead, they would say, you are a hub. We're all going to call into you. You are going to connect to a hub in another state. You're going to quickly do some transfer, and then you're going to disconnect, and then we'll all reconnect later and get your message. If this sounds like it took multiple days to get an email, yes, it did. But it was very cheap, except for the hubs. A little expensive for the hubs. You had to do these state calls, and they would ask for money. Some of them would do tricks and steal from work. Some of them would use weird businesses to make it happen. So it was something that there was always a lot of trouble with. Okay? But if you became the hub, you were the shit. So John Richard became the shit. John Richard was, of course, Robert Hokum, John Alishi's name, when he started with this crowd. He got involved in them. He became their hub. He was running all sorts of different businesses with people. And there is a heartbreaking document, which is how I found this in 1988, when he skipped town, of how much he had hurt this community. Because, I mean, people were waiting for him to make a talk at a users group meeting. He had told some other people he was heading up to Boston for a quick errand. He had, of course, had his bulletin board system doing all of this mail hub, and then one by one it all disappeared. They couldn't find him, his bulletin board went under, everything. And that's when people started to realize that they had invested with him for equipment, and he had it, that they had invested money with him, that they had done all these things with him, and he had skipped the hell out of town. I've spoken to those people. They are not happy. This is not something that made them happy. Ironically, the way I heard about it when I was 18 was on the very same FidoNet, they could ship files among different areas. It was called Echo Hub. And what they did was they put his mugshot, his information, and everything else on it and scattered it everywhere. Did it help? No. In fact, when he moved to where he moved next, which was Indianapolis, he set up another FidoNet hub. So he got to watch it. He got to watch the pain. He got to watch what he did, all right? He got to listen to it for some period of time. So I collected all this stuff when I figured out that this guy who died looks like he was that guy from that FidoNet thing I read. And I started to collect everything about him. And I contacted the original FidoNet community of people who are now, of course, in their years and years had gone by, 12 years had gone by, and told them, here's an estate you should probably go after. And I do know that many of them did. So there was this bizarre link to me. I wanted to understand this man because it was so strange to me that he would do this, that he would destroy a community in Minnesota and then find himself somewhere in Indianapolis and set up an ISP. And that is what he did, by the way. He set up an ISP. He set up a computer business and an ISP, and I've seen it. It's a sketchy little building. And he set this thing up, and it took off. It took off. It turns out that the ISP of the mid-1990s was the video store of the 1980s, was the video arcade of the 1970s, was the, I don't know, opium bordello of the 1890s. It just turns out that this was the thing to do. You could not mess it up, right? You could not mess it up. And he didn't. The company, called iQuest, took off. It took off, and it became one of Indianapolis's largest ISPs. Here's John Alesh when he is 17. This photo hasn't really gotten out around as much. This is a 17-year-old John Alesh. John Aleshi. This is from his yearbook. When he died, he had a bunch of Corvettes, he had a beautiful house, and he had fucked hundreds of people over in his life. Here he is, and he is 17 years old. Here's the boy that became the man. And I was interested to find out why. Now, he has a brother, and initially when the press tried to reach the brother, he refused to in 2000. Because I was giving this talk, I thought, it's time to bite the bullet, it's time to call the brother. And to his great compliment, he did talk to me for an hour. So I really appreciate that. He didn't have to do that at all. And I just wanted, he said, so what do you want to know? I know exactly who you are. You're the guy with the page. And you can imagine that you know that your last name of your family, because he still has the same last name, that's the first match. And so he knows me. And I just said, I'm trying to figure out what happened. How did he go from this Catholic school, high school picture, and here he is again. He's the second from the left standing up, playing tennis. He's a letterman. How do you go from that to scamming? And I mean scamming. Scamming to the point that you lose your finger wrestling with a cop in the back of a cop car with a gun. Where does that happen? And he said two things to me that I'll remember. First one was, I'd like to tell you about the good man, the good part of him, the part that you're not finding, and I can't. There's nothing for me to tell you that. The last time I remember my brother, he was getting into a rented car after his hearing and being bailed out by me and his family who had lent him money, and he drove into the night, and I never saw him again until I saw him on the table in the morgue when they made me identify the body. The other thing that he told me was, I can't tell you what turned him, because we were both adopted, if that matters. We were raised by two loving parents in a Catholic home, in a Catholic high school in Nevada, and we had friends, and things were great. And I said, so what about the wedding? Because I found there was a wedding when he was 19. And he said, I found out about that when he was dead. No idea that he was ever married. That particular wife decided not to talk to me, or didn't return my phone calls, which is fine. But he was married at some point. He said, I don't know. Our mother died right after he graduated, and he just must have fallen in with a bad crowd, because it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And like I said, he had lent him money, and he had rented a car in his name from the hotel that he was working at, so his brother could have a car to get his defense together, and his brother instead drove into the night. And the way that Tom found this out was that he was arrested for grand theft auto of the rental car. I was very pleased that he told me all these things, that he was able to give me this back fact, because even though it's not, you can't find the thing. I mean, supposedly the mother's death, I guess you could tell yourself that a mother's death would send you reeling into an endless life of crime. But there were many times that he could have stopped, that he had quite a bit. He had scammed a town. He had shown them he was superior. His brother told me he was a genius. He had playing with ham radio when he was 12, fell into computers. He was a computer genius. But he didn't want to study. He didn't want the easy way to go by while he worked so hard. He wanted to snap his fingers and be rich. And that's in fact what he did. Everything, every single move he made in computers, everything was to do that. I put this in just because this was interesting to me. This is him in a group of lettermen. This is all the athletic students together. He's not off to the side. He's smiling. He's just another face in the crowd. This face in this crowd of this Catholic high school, just with his whole life in front of him. We have no idea what's going through his mind. I will never know what was going through his mind. His family doesn't know. His father died in 1998, having never known what ever happened to his son again. When he died at the age of 41. He was over 300 pounds. He was living large. Not only was he living large, he was living super large. He had sold the ISP in February of that year, February of 2000, for $14 million, which was supposed to go to the company. And what they discovered was that he had actually wired half of it to himself. He was gonna do it. He was gonna pull the biggest fucking scam of it all. And he wired the money in, and he had a heart attack, and he died. So I try to think about, when you go off and you enter into this world, and some of you were young, some of you were older, but you say to yourself, well, surely this person can't be, this person doesn't seem sketchy. This thing I'm entering into doesn't seem so bad. And I must tell you that I can show you plenty of proof that it's actually even worse than you think. That there's so much potential for people to tell you one thing, to tell you another. And as we go through yet another bubble, as we work to engineer this bubble, and we start to think that a photo company can be sold for $1 billion with no social ramifications whatsoever, and we tell ourselves that obviously we must flip, we must promise, we must overpromise because that's what we do, I'll tell you, you have a lot of company in that thinking. It's because this is always the easy way out. So when I say to myself, like, what was John Alishi thinking when he died? Again, he might have gone quick, he might not have gone quick, but if he didn't go quick, all I can think of was what he was thinking was, I almost made it. And a lifetime of running came to an end. Thank you very much. So, I'll happily take questions or comments or whatever else. I can answer whatever you'd like. I'll say again, this was, I started to research this in 2000. I pitched it a few times at This American Life, pitch it around, but This American Life is a rather insular, although it's a very wonderful group. I don't really want to do a film documentary. I'm not overly interested in doing an audio documentary. I will give you one fact that I did not put in this speech. I interviewed a guy who ran the other ISP, or one of the other bigger ISPs. He actually sought me out at an event. And he ran an ISP that competed with them, but they were friendly buddies. They were always hanging out. And what he told me was that as part of what they did, they did a bunch of things, they would also kind of interface with law enforcement, because they're an ISP, this is not out of control. So once every month or two, John Paul Alishi would have lunch with the representative of the local FBI office. For years. And I said, what? I did that too. I said, I can't believe he must have had the biggest balls of anyone I know. And his wife, the interviewee's wife was in the back, and she shouted, yes, and he died of a heart attack at 41, which is true. It's a hell of a stressful life, knowing. See, because what they found in his shipping container was a fully gassed truck loaded with fake IDs. He was ready at any time he needed to, all right? So this was not a man who had been in this community for 14 years. It was just a really good run. It was not a life of permanence. So, he didn't have any sort of a wife or kids or anything. He was a loner, and that was that.